So here we have Monsters, Inc. Scream Team, which is more widely known as Monsters, Inc. Scare Island. This game was developed by Artificial Mind and Movement, who have made a lot of other 3D platformers, most notably Scalar, which is one of their only original games. I did skip the tutorial because it's kind of lengthy and I can explain the mechanics a little bit faster. What we have right here is the hub area. There are 3 worlds to choose from, each with 4 stages each, and this big building in the center is basically just the help center. There is an element of non-linearity to choosing the stages, though they are presented in order of difficulty from left to right, so you might just want to do them in order anyway. So the first couple of things you're going to notice about this game are that the worlds are pretty open, even if they're kind of small, and there are little canisters hidden everywhere. I shouldn't say hidden, they're just spread all over the place. These cans of primordial ooze, as the game calls them, fill up our scare meter on the left, and you can see it fills up in segments. We have the blue filled up, which means we can now scare blue nerves. Now, as we perform a QTE to scare this robotic child, you might be thinking, hey, this seems a little weird. And firstly, no, you're weird, but secondly, all of these locations are simulations of places the monsters might encounter in real life. This may seem kind of strange, but it actually allows for some decent humor. So as you might be able to tell by the few mechanics we've seen so far, this game's design borrows heavily from other 3D platformers of the era, meaning to say it's a collectathon of sorts, and it's kind of non-linear, but the worlds aren't exactly enormous. It does put its own spin on things, however, as we're not just going around collecting some alternative to stars, we're collecting these primordial ooze canisters in order to scare nerves. And even if the scaring itself is ultimately just a QTE, they still manage to take a piece of the Monsters, Inc. world and tie it into the basic mechanics that are expected of a platformer of this era. And I think that's kind of worth something on its own. You might have noticed that there's not an awful lot of platforming in this platformer so far, and that's because this stage doesn't really have any of it. And it is essentially the first stage, so it's basically focused on showing you how the game's structure will work as opposed to the actual platforming. There's even another collectible that we have yet to see, but it wasn't really included in the main part of this stage simply because they didn't want to bother the player with it this early. So obviously the game design is not in full effect here, but it's important to show this stage because, well, it lays out how everything works. It teaches the player that you can't get all the nerves immediately, you have to come back for some items or objects, and there are some areas that are locked off until you perform certain events, which you're about to see shortly. As I mentioned before, there is also a tutorial, but I feel like this stage serves as a much better introduction to the game. Oh, and all the music in this game is kind of awesome, not just because it's bouncy and fun, but because it's all atmospherically appropriate. For example, we're in the city park right now, and the music in the stage is very loud, but it's also very whimsical and playful. Which, you know, is something I would expect to hear when I think of City Park, especially in a colorful 3D platformer. You can hear what I mean. You probably also noticed that many of the nerves are goofing around, hiding places, or playing like real children would, or at least how monsters think real children would play. In combination with the music and colorful graphics, that helps to give the game a very fun personality. It just has an all-around enjoyable presentation. Something we have yet to discuss is that there are 2 playable characters, both Mike and Sully, and there are different reasons to play as both. Sully is better for combat-heavy stages, as his attacks reach farther due to his large frame. For example, his most basic attack is a rather unimpressive-looking swipe, but it basically allows you to stand still and wait for the enemies to come to you. So obviously Sully was the best choice for this intro stage, as the main obstacles are the toys. You're given different medals depending on what you do in a stage, as it just said a bronze medal is for scaring 5 nerves, and a gold is for scaring 10, and a silver is for something we haven't seen yet. So we just exited the world, but of course we're going to go right back in. And we're also going to go with Mike this time, both because we haven't played as him yet, and the stage kind of recommends it on its loading screen. So here we are in downtown, which has some of my favorite music in the game, and also is the first stage with real platforming in it. Now, something we didn't really get to see Sully do was use his ground pound, and Sully's ground pound is kind of generic, but Mike, he bounces around like a little ball. He can only bounce 3 times before he has to stop, but it's still very useful because you're effectively invincible while you do so. The scaring mechanics are identical for both characters for obvious reasons. Now, Mike is also far more nimble than Sully. He moves a lot faster and he bounces all over the place literally. For this reason, he's ideal for platform-heavy stages, which is why we picked him for this one. We won't see platforming for a few more minutes, but it's here. This stage also really piles on the extra lives. Not so much in this first area, but trust me, we'll have well over 15 by the time we're done here. Now right over here we have our first monster coin. Collecting 10 of these will give us the silver medal in the stage. Monster coins are often very well hidden, unlike the nerves which are just hanging around everywhere. The monster coins in this stage aren't too difficult to find, but it is only the second stage. It's just introducing the idea. This is also where they first show the player the idea of multi-room stages. Now, the first stage we played through did have 1 extra room, but this one has quite a few more. Let's just listen to the music for a second until we get to that door we opened. And now we're in the toy store, which isn't nearly as full of enemies as you'd expect, but there is a new one in here. And as we're playing as Mike, I'm going to show you exactly what you should not do. Not that, that was actually what you should do. Yeah, we're not Sully, we can't just smack them, we don't have that kind of reach, and to boot, some of Mike's attacks don't hurt enemies at all. The nerves here are also the first to actually try to avoid us, as opposed to just goofing around and standing still. I mean, they're still goofing around, but they're goofing around with a bit more purpose. That new area is tempting, but we do need to get a few more canisters so we can deal with our first platforming nerve. Now obviously we could just go about chasing her around. But as you see, that's not working very well. She even cut off my scare cutscene, so we need to try and jump a little bit ahead of her. And even though we didn't land in front of her, we got plenty close enough to scare her. Now obviously this is pretty basic stuff, and the nerves in later stages will do a much better job of avoiding you.
Not bad for a guy with one eye!
Now, we could, of course, leave the stage if we wanted to, but we don't want to do that. We want to see what's behind that door we opened earlier. Right after I finished obsessively collecting canisters. Now here's the first introduction to platforming, and it's impossible to die or fall off in here, which makes it perfect to show the player the basics. It also, like I said earlier, shoves a whole ton of 1-ups in your face, so that's fun too. There's nothing like incredibly remarkable about this room, but it's a quick and fun way to say, hey, you're going to be doing this a lot. And now we're somewhere a bit more open air. It's very possible to fall off here. Not that it's easy to fall off here, but it is possible. Also, something worth noting is the way they use the environmental design with the game design. That little area back there with the packages and now the rooftop, it's a neat way to show the player's platforming and keep the game in tone. Now, of course, that's something that's pretty basic, but it's something the game does consistently and something it does well, save for the floating platforms just sticking out right here. But we can forget about those, right? Again, it really helps that the game has a good amount of personality, like that billboard that just says sugar, salt, fat on it. You wouldn't ordinarily expect a joke like that to be in a game like this, which makes it really fun that it's there. This is our first red nerve, which is the strongest nerve and takes the longest to scare. Now that's pretty much all there is to this stage, at least for now. If you get all 4 bronze medals in a world, you unlock something special. For this world, it's the trampolines, which allows you to get to hidden areas, but you're not going to see that. That doesn't mean you're not going to see the trampolines in action, though. In fact, let's skip ahead just a little bit to show you something else this game has to offer. In place of a boss fight at the end of each world, you're given a race with Randall, and the race makes use of whatever new item you got from completing the world. There are 2 factors that determine whether you win, those being how many coins you get and whether you finish the race in first. We do only need to get 75 coins for this course, but we also need to come in first no matter what. Sometimes the slide sections will be broken up with platforming, and in these platforming sections, which you're about to see, we can either use the item we got from completing the world, or we can platform the old-fashioned way. Now, if we don't use the item, we get more coins, but it also gives Randall a chance to jump ahead. You might have noticed the blue flaming streak coming out of our butt, and that's because I'm holding down forward, which makes us go faster. It also makes it a little harder to steer, but this is the first course, so I'll be fine. You also just saw some platforming on the slide itself, which does happen a lot in later stages, and makes it kind of difficult. Oh, Randall, no. This is kind of a weird replacement for a boss fight, but it does show you how to use the item you just got from completing the world, and it's better than having no conclusion at all. And with the race finished, that's it for this video.
Alright! Yeah!
You won't be so lucky next time.
So that was Monsters, Inc. Scream Team, and it's not incredibly outstanding or anything, but it is fun, it is colorful, and it has some pretty good music. Remember to eat your sugar, salt, fat, and I'll see you next time.